Hello and welcome to another Inside the Studio. I'm Pete Heslop.
And I'm Dan Jones.
And we are Steadfast Collective. We are a digital product studio based on the South Coast, and we are lifting the lid on what it's like to run an agency. So Dan, what are we chatting about today?
So we are talking about our last Creative X event.
Yeah.
So that's Creative X Business for those who don't know. That's a monthly event that we run to bring businesses and creatives together under one roof to sort of share ideas and collaborate and sort of meet each other and make connections.
Yeah. So our last event, we were fortunate enough to have Mills and Neef come down from ustwo. It was a really interesting story of how we managed to book them. Essentially, Mills sent out a tweet saying, we're launching something cool, we want to announce it outside London, and I raised my hand, jumped into his DMs and was like, we run this cool thing in Southampton, why don't you come on down? If you're not sure who ustwo are, they're basically a multi-faceted company based in Southampton and around the world. They employ around 260 people. They run a client services facing agency. They run a game development studio who made Monument Valley, which you probably have heard of. And they also run an adventure arm, which is kind of their investments. And they came down and we did a Q&A with them and kind of just asked some questions through the night about what it's like to run a business that big, how they got started, all those kind of things.
Yeah, so during the event, we asked them lots of different questions about all the different areas of their business. And that surfaced a few sort of really good points that we want to talk about today. And the first one of those was how they sort of bring people together within their different companies, and they aren't just like a games company that does games, but they're also sort of UI designers, and they have all of these different skills that they can bring into one studio.
So we asked them how Monument Valley became a bit of a success, and their thinking for this, kind of Mills's answer for this was around, well, we did a bunch of games beforehand, and what happened was they had kind of medium results, and to kind of hit that high level that they wanted to hit, what they realized is they actually need to bring in game people. So they were kind of a design development company and kind of trying to build games, but they were missing kind of that story element, the people who could really elevate them. So they brought in some game people, and that really kind of took off from Monument Valley onwards, and their games have been kind of successful since. And it was a really good example of how they were able to build something which potentially a traditional games company couldn't build because they didn't have kind of that background experience of UI and development, but then ustwo without the games kind of input wouldn't be able to do because they didn't have the story. And it was interesting the way they needed both parts in balance to build something which is kind of magic.
Yeah, I think Mills said during the event that it was vital that neither of them could have done it individually, and it was sort of the combination of the two that really brought it up to be what it is and stepped it up to another level. It
was really good, which brings us on to like a point too. So I asked a question around kind of how do you deal with having, your games team working on a new game for a few years, you've got your agency who are trying to service clients the whole time. How do you kind of deal with potentially people wanting to swap between teams? And they said kind of as they've developed and kind of set their processes, they are separate companies now per se under one umbrella. So that's kind of less of a thing, but what they do is able to bring across resources and skills. So if there's, say, in the studio side, they need some of that skill set kind of in the adventure side potentially, they can move skills and resources around, or potentially just kind of teach between departments, which I think is really interesting and useful across kind of any business, really. Kind of that idea that actually your team should be learning from each other, not just isolated in their own little bubble. There's stuff that if you're running a restaurant, your front of house team could learn from your kitchen can learn from your front of house team.
The bit I found really interesting was when they talked about like the underlying culture and how each company has its own sort of culture that's developed individually, and you can go, for example, into the games company and they've got sort of stuff all over the walls of their games and sort of concepts and stuff like that, whereas on the client side it's a slightly different cultural feeling, but underlying it all, it's all very, very ustwo, even though they're all separate. And you can walk in and there's this underlying ustwo-ness to it.
There's a baseline, they said. There's a baseline of ustwo-ness, and each one has its own little verticals of quirks. But ultimately they all feel like ustwo, whether you're in Sydney at a studio or whether you're in the games department kind of in London.
Which I think is really good, because then when, for example, like some of the UI designers need to go into the games team, they can go in, it feels like an extension of where they've been working, and they can slot right in and learn and share those ideas.
Yeah. And then kind of the third point, which really resonated with me, was something that Mills said, which was you have to change to stay the same. So they were saying, you know, when they started the business, everything was quite fast and free-flowing and almost that kind of mentality of just kind of get it done and whatnot. And it was as they grew past, a couple of hundred people, actually sometimes you need to change your processes to keep your culture the same. So they wanted the culture of valuing people and doing great work and those kind of real core principles. But they realized that actually for some people to feel valued, they need stricter HR policies. They need more thought going into things like whistleblowing and becoming a B Corp and those kind of things. They need more structure than they thought they needed when you're dealing with a company that size.
It's something I think we found as we've been growing as well, that putting all of those processes in, it means that it protects the core values of the business, and having sort of clear steps and clear sort of practices to do and deliver things ensures that the expectations are always met, but everything's guarded in a way that, like, if you've got like a core value of making sure that your clients are always like the first thought, and that you really want to make sure that you're always communicating to them, and that you've got this sort of warmth to your business, that's guarded, and that you can do that without sort of straying too far from that path.
It's good.
Which I think is really important.
I think if you do it correctly, process can be more freeing than restrictive.
Yeah.
It's a bit like having a budget, right? So
Yeah.
in your personal finances, if having a budget, you actually find that can be quite freeing in how you do spend your excess money, rather than restrictive how you think it may be. I just think you need to do it in the correct way.
Yeah.
Because having those processes in place gives us freedom to make decisions going forward and kind of work through our day, because there's plans and processes in place for hopefully most things we do.
It gives us real clear boundaries, I think. Like, we know where the lanes are, where like there's room to stray, and where things can be flexed a little bit.
Yeah, that's good.
And where things are like fixed, and like it just gives us that scope to make sure that what we're doing we're not trying to stray too far from what is expected of the company as a whole, and all of those sort of other like ideas that are ideological to the business.
It's good. Yeah, so there were just a few points we really enjoyed from the talk with us two, kind of the interview we had with them. The full video will be online shortly. Hopefully by the end of this week, the full video will be online, so you can watch the full thing there. The last thing I wanted to mention was they announced their First Mile program. So this is part of the adventure kind of team, and they announced this thing called First Mile, which is essentially kind of like an anti-incubator. So what they want to do is they want to get along people who are starting creative and kind of smart businesses, and they want to give them £10,000 and they want to give them a year of support. And they really want to help them grow, and they're selecting 4 people. Applicants currently open. You can search First Mile ustwo on Google to find that. And they really want to get behind a few entrepreneurial people to really give them what they need to get them to that first mile. And I love that mix of cash and
so the really magical thing about this is that it's not just the money, and it's not just the experience that ustwo have. They're giving all of their connections, they're giving all of their skills that they've sort of gathered over the years, and they're also giving money to sort of start up and start going. So they're giving £10,000. And having those skills and those learnings that ustwo have learned as an agency and a company ensures that £10,000 can go as far as it needs to.
It's good.
And having the money means that they can use the learnings to the utmost and really apply them. Yeah.
So if that's of interest to you, I would really recommend checking it out. Get in contact with the ustwo team for kind of further information. But all the information you should need is on the website. Just search First Mile ustwo and you'll find it.
Yeah.
Fab. Thanks for joining us for another week. We'll be back next week with another video. You can watch these on YouTube, just search Steadfast Collective, or you can find us on your favourite podcasting app, just search Steadfast Collective or Inside the Studio and you'll find us.
Yeah, and if you do want to come to our next event, all of the details for CreativeX is online at creativex.business. Come along next month.
Yeah, we'll see you there.
See you there.
Cheers.